Hello, nerds, and welcome to the Engadget podcast. This is episode 31, Look Inside America. I am your host, Terrence O'Brien, and I am joined this week by a trio of out-of-towners. We have a special all-British episode. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of British tech news to talk about, so we're actually going to talk about America, the greatest country, guys.
A country.
A country. So joining me this week, we have on the far left, James Trew.
Hi, Terrence.
We've got Matt Smith.
Hey, Terry.
I hate you so much right now. And Aaron Souppouris.
Hiya.
Who I'm always afraid I'm going to butcher your name, but I didn't.
No, it's
All right.
medical.
We're good.
Souppouris is.
Yeah, for those who don't know, I just don't know how to pronounce things. That's like my thing.
You're Terrence O'Brien, right?
Yeah, O'Brien.
Yeah.
O'Brien. That's nice.
So how are you guys doing? You a little tired, a little jet-lagged?
Various degrees of jet lagged. I think Matt much worse than I, because I came in last Friday.
I think this transmits well on a podcast video, but yeah, I'm really quite tired now. Brain is failing. I'll be playing the role on the podcast of, I understand the story, but what do you think about the story?
Yeah, sure.
You're just going to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I think I'll be
for the
better
reader.
once this rehearsal's over and we can start the podcast proper.
Oh, no, this is the real thing. It's going well so far, right? We run a real professional operation here, guys. So why don't we get right to it, because there's only so much time in the day, and there's so many things to talk about. Let's start, as we do every week, with Flame Wars. This is where we kind of debate the biggest stories of the week. This is largely a, kind of intellectual exercise, play devil's advocate and all that stuff. I want to start with a story that I thought was pretty interesting. I'm actually kind of amazed that it took this long to happen, which is that Consumer Reports, for the three of you who don't live in America and apparently had no idea what Consumer Reports is, which this is going to be a real good conversation.
Yep.
We have an analogy. We have a British equivalent, I think, we were
What
saying.
do you think it's called, Terrence?
I have no idea.
Which name would it have?
Oh,
It's called Which.
it's called Which.
Right.
Okay, so Which.
With an H.
Okay, so Which and Consumer Reports are roughly the same idea.
One is a lot more prestigious. and
Okay.
A lot less British.
All right. And presumably that's Consumer Reports.
You're there. You're right there with us.
So yeah, I mean, they finally decided they're going to start rating and ranking products based on their security and privacy features. For a outlet that recommends products, especially connected home products and stuff, it seems like this is kind of a long time coming. But I kind of wanted to ask you guys, whether or not this is kind of long overdue, or is this something that, it's not easy to implement. It's not the sort of thing that people saw coming.
Yeah,
I don't
know. I agree that it's overdue. At the same time, as like an entity that reviews products, it's tough to know. Like, not everyone is a security expert, and it's going to be a huge undertaking for them to really be able to give that early judgment on a product's security and privacy until the security community has been able to properly test the product. So it's a huge undertaking. It's difficult for them to do. So well done on them for taking it on.
Do you think it's partially a thing of just this is, for them, new territory? I mean, generally Consumer Reports focuses on like cars and appliances and stuff, and now that we have connected refrigerators, they were still thinking about it just as a refrigerator and not as like a piece of internet connected an appliance or whatever.
I mean, this is definitely the challenge for them. I think Aaron was right in saying oftentimes you don't even know what the privacy issue is until it becomes an issue later on. So I'd be interested to know how they're going to do it. Have they specified their method?
So I honestly didn't get a chance to finish reading their full post about it. There are some details about how they're going to do it. It's a surprisingly detailed blog post about it. They're partnering with some other organizations
Oh, yeah,
to
the
help.
Cyber Independent Testing Lab.
Yes.
I definitely didn't read that off the screen.
You're definitely not staring at our article about it right now.
Yeah. I mean, they've got lots of tools and they're very well versed in, typical security practices. But yeah, I think, like we've all touched on now, it's more, you might look at a product when it, before it launches and when it arrives, you think, yeah, this is very secure, it ticks all our boxes, and then 2 months later, someone's broken it open.
And that's the biggest worry I have with this whole thing is, sure, they're saying it's not going to be like a recommendation on security, but if you're saying, if you're making definitive statements on a product security, are you going to lull those people into a false sense of security? So, pardon the pun. Like, Apple employs dozens of people to make sure your iPhone is secure. Every couple of months, an iPhone flaw is revealed. And if you're telling people that their fridge is secure, and then if it's like my mom, she's not going to go and update her fridge and make sure that it's always on the latest version. And she's just going to think that it's secure. And so how are they balancing that?
I mean, it could be that they're just going to establish this baseline of the security isn't terrible. It isn't.
They've thought about this.
Yeah, I think a baseline is a better judgment and measure for security rather than saying, this is impregnable, it will solve all your worries, you'll be safe forever. It's just saying, it's not terrible, it's not a robot teddy bear that records your children's conversations and then tries to sell them snacks and stuff,
Yeah.
I mean, and like you said, it's a move in the right direction. And yeah, it's surprised it's taken this long to get here when we've had Nest for years.
What I want to know is it going to be someone's job to have to read through the terms and conditions? Because no one ever does that, right? I mean, at least I assume no one does that. Scroll to the bottom.
I mean, it's Consumer Reports' job to do that. That's kind of like what they do is they're going to be reading that stuff so that we don't have to. Just like Consumerist does that sort of like digging through these things.
I literally heard James's sigh then from over there.
So, for Britishness, is it like hardware they review, or do they do software as well?
I think they do almost entirely hardware, actually.
Because 90% of problems now is in software and privacy on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. So if you tell me how secure my iPhone is and then I go ahead and sign Twitter's terms and conditions, that completely erases any sort of privacy that I had before, because now I've signed up to this arcane mixture of stuff.
It's not the iPhone's fault you've signed through to something.
When you have connected devices, it's only as secure as what you're running on them, right?
Yeah.
So how are they factoring that in? I don't know. It's a huge...
So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different stuff, it sounds like, that's going on. Again, there are some unanswered questions. It seems like one of the things they'd have to have, this standard that they're looking for would have to be regular updates or the ability to update without user interference. That seems like it would be, a logical idea. If you're going to rate something on security and privacy, Samsung being able to push a software update to your connected fridge and you don't have to do anything actively to think about it, because we all know how bad users are at making sure things are up to date. That seems like it's a good thing. I don't know specifically if that's actually in their requirements. I know one of the big ones is during setup you have to set a custom username and password, because that's one of those weird things when you buy a router, or if you buy a connected baby monitor, or you buy one of these other weird little appliances, they have default passwords and usernames that you either can't change, or the way to change them isn't made immediately obvious, and they just assume you're going to roll with the default one.
And that's how the Mirai botnet happens.
Yeah, that's how you lose half the internet, basically.
Well, I'm interested. So I'm one of the guys who bought a Vizio TV. So,
good luck
right,
with that.
Yep.
On Arlo's recommendation, so one of our TV editors' recommendation, I'm just going to add that in. I'm pretty happy with it, but obviously it was in the news recently because they have a software that spies on what you view and it reports it back. Is that the sort of stuff that would surface in one of these consumer reports?
That I'm not sure. That's the sort of thing that probably wouldn't be caught initially.
Even though it's in the user agreement, it's not secret. It's just that no one reads the
It's not just that. It's also, I think, the way a lot of those user agreements are phrased are intentionally confusing.
Yeah.
Even though there's standards now about being in certain amounts of plain language, it really doesn't work. They're still super confusing.
It's very easy still to bamboozle, even when you're using, plain English.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if that's the sort of thing that would be caught up here. This seems mostly focused on, security and privacy in the narrowest sense of the word, as opposed to worrying about what the company is doing with your information once you give it to them. It's more about making sure you're not saving user data unsecurely, that you're not storing it perpetually, that you're clearing out accounts, and when you're, if you're reselling a device. We had a piece from Violet Blue go up recently about a guy who had access to his car through an app, even after he sold it. And he tried to remove the car from the phone, tried to do all these things, and no matter what he did, he couldn't get rid of access to this car that he had sold years ago. he was still able to like turn it on, unlock the doors or whatever from an app on his phone.
That's awesome.
And it turns out that like the only people who had the ability to actually remove that access for him was the manufacturer, and there was no way to find that out easily and get that done. So that's like one of the things that Consumer Reports is looking for. It seems like is, you know, when you transfer a product to somebody else, if you sell it to somebody else, there's an easy way to clear your data off of it or off the cloud storage portion of the product.
So I was just going to say, is it analogous then maybe to iFixit, who gives a repairability score? So they sort of deconstruct a product and figure out how repairable it is, and Consumer Reports is going to sort of deconstruct the product, air quotes, and give it a security score based on the measures it lets you control to fix all that up.
That seems a little bit more analogous. I don't know that they're giving it like a number score necessarily. Right. I think it's if I remember correctly, I think it's basically like pass fail, more or less.
4 padlocks.
Yeah. I mean, I could look it up real quick, but I'm pretty sure that basically what they're doing is they're just kind of setting like a baseline standard, and it's a pass-fail kind of thing, because this is them still kind of tinkering with what it's going to be. They haven't necessarily wholly locked it in. They're referring to it, quote, as a first draft. So this is going to change over time, I'm sure.
Do you think that like having such a consumer non-tech publication looking at security so seriously is going to actually push these non-tech companies into being more secure? Like, they have like such a big role in rating products that, like, there's this thing at every company needs to be a tech company now.
Yeah.
Because tech is everywhere. And do you think that Consumer Reports is big enough and has enough sway that car companies and fridge companies are going to be taking this stuff a lot more seriously?
I mean, I would hope so. That seems like it's the one good thing, like one of the good things that's going to come out of this is Consumer Reports being such a mainstream outlet, something that consumers are very familiar with. It's the sort of thing that, like, if you get a Consumer Reports Best Buy, that's the sort of thing a car maker brags about in a commercial.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really drawing attention to that, and hopefully that means that manufacturers will have to start paying better attention to it, because as more and more of these appliances are getting connected to the internet, if you're getting a failing grade on security and privacy from Consumer Reports because your connected fridge doesn't let you change the password without jumping through 1,000,001 hoops, you're not going to buy that fridge, hopefully.
Cool.
And how often does Consumer Reports kind of adapt what it does? I mean, is it like a dyed-in-the-wool format that's... are they reluctant to change? Is this a big deal for them, or
I mean,
otherwise?
This is a pretty big deal for them. This is a pretty big change, but I don't work for Consumer Reports, obviously, so I don't want to speak too much about how resistant they are to change and all of that. I mean, I think they kind of catch up with the industry when it seems necessary. Sometimes they're a little bit more behind because they are kind of an older school, stodgier sort of thing, but I think they've in general been pretty much willing to stay in locks on top of things. I did look before while we were talking, and they do software ratings and stuff, like they rate security software and things like that, so they've been kind of tied into that for a while.
I guess I was trying to bring it back to that original question of, are they late to this? Should have they been doing it for a long time? I
mean, I think the thing is that it's kind of a hard question to answer, right? I mean, that's sort of the point.
Literally.
I know, that's the question we're trying to address. I'm not saying it has a clean and easy answer.
I mean, does Engadget give a score for security and privacy in our reviews?
We do not.
It's factored into it.
It's factored into
they're
it.
about on time.
Yeah, they're about on time. I think that actually is the... We do factor it in, but we do not have a dedicated privacy and security score. You are right. So...
That would be so soul-destroying. For everything. For everything.
Let's move on to the second topic, though, for Flame Wars this week. And this one is
silly.
This is ridiculous. So, the New York Times announced that they're going to be making some changes to the format of their A2 and A3 pages, so the front section of the paper. And they're going to be including, sort of little tidbits and facts, behind-the-scenes looks at stuff, like all this sort of weird bits and pieces of information, not your standard big news story stuff that they usually front load. They're pushing that a little bit further back. The front page, to be clear, though, is not changing.
Okay.
But what they're also going to be including on the second and third page of the paper now are reprints of their reporters' tweets. So they're just going to straight take tweets from reporters' timelines and presumably sans context just reprint them in the newspaper.
That's a big assumption.
Um,
So carry on.
I'm sure they'd
Well, I
stand
mean-
alone. They'd be standalone tweets.
I'm in
That's the
favor
point.
of this. So
Oh,
if you
okay,
need-
so,
if you need
well,
someone-
my question, is this a sign of the apocalypse?
no, it's a
No.
sign.
No.
It's a sign of a media company moving with the times.
The New York Times.
Okay.
Get out.
No, but
Get
se-
off the podcast, Matt.
But seriously, you can't expect, like, obviously the MIT is doing really well at the moment, but
Yeah.
you can't expect a company to run two separate versions of the same thing and have them be so very different. And I think this is a sign of the times that they're moving print closer towards the feel of the MIT homepage.
I think it's not a big deal. I think it's
Yeah.
literally them pulling digital into their print. It's like quoting a reporter, or it's just something very sharp. It's like a big picture. It's like a little column. It's like a little nugget of news. I find it hard to care too much about it.
Like 3 years ago, people were rolling their eyes when the BBC, like the MIT,
Have
but
you heard
better
of-
because it's British.
Yeah.
I've
So-
never heard of this thing before. This is
So-
all new to me.
The BBC started like screenshotting and inserting tweets into their articles, and everyone was like, "This has no place in news," and now we don't even think about it. And it's like bringing in tweets, which is a huge part of journalism and criticism and culture now, into print is just fine.
Well, I like the element of it where it's like everyone criticized Spicer for printing off his tweets and bringing them to his.
Do you think they were inspired
That's
by
like
it?
a huge thing in American government, right? Like I always see people with like giant
Yeah.
tweets
Giant
in the
tweets.
Senate.
Yeah, well, I mean, our Congress and Senate are jokes, and they do weird, stupid things sometimes. They bring lots of stupid things on giant poster boards into that place.
Okay.
So I kind of like that ridiculous component to it, where maybe they're kind of introducing the sort of stalwart newspaper readers to this thing called Twitter. Here it is. We're going to print some for you.
But I find it odd in that tweets aren't just the content of the tweets. There's the timeline, there's the timestamp,
thread
there's the
and
person that's
the GIF.
written it, there's the all important GIF that's embedded, and you're going to miss all of that. I mean, sure, you could print the picture.
I think they have intelligent enough people working there that they probably will provide some context for these tweets. I don't think you're just.
I
Gonna
just
get
mean like
10
the
tweets from the New
I mean the
York Times.
interactivity of Twitter and
Yeah, I mean, if I
embedded
can't
tweets online.
if I can't just hit the retweet button, what's the point?
Yeah.
How many people are going to
You,
sit there?
you can photocopy it.
I can't wait for old.
They
Put
need
it in
QR
traditional
codes.
retweet.
They
Oh,
need
God.
QR codes. I'll just take
Manual
my phone,
retweet.
Take a photo.
Well, this kind of reminds me of I'll protect their anonymity because it's someone that works with us, but maybe a colleague, I'll call them Flamber, who was telling me a story about someone in their family who used to, when they discovered stories they thought were of interest to them, they would print them off, pop them in a letter and post them to them.
Wow.
Real smooth. Real
Yeah.
smooth.
Right.
It's
So now that the anonymity is covered,
Yeah.
But this idea of taking a web page, printing it off, going the ceremony of putting it in an envelope and posting it to you because it was of interest, I found infinitely sweet.
It is.
There's lots of facets. There's another co-worker called Grimathy, who often will print out his drafts of his features and writing to proofread in a physical copy before going back to the digital copy.
Yeah, we're going to get rid of that.
Yeah. You mean Grimathy himself?
Oh, yeah, of course.
I
Of
hope so.
course.
Well, I mean, so here's my issue with this. I don't have problems with tweets appearing in my news stories. Like, I think people getting up in arms about screenshots of tweets on the BBC is, like, dumb. Like, that's a dumb thing to get upset about. And I mean, clearly we haven't seen this in practice yet, so we don't know for sure what the final product's going to look like. But it kind of sounds like they're building like this weird sort of teaser page in hopes of like, this is going to get you excited to read what's showing up later in the paper, which I feel like is a format that doesn't necessarily work in print. Like, if you've bought the newspaper and you've made it to page 3, you're already in. I don't need Maggie Haberman's tweets to lure me further into the newspaper. I already follow her on Twitter if I'm that interested, probably.
But does the typical MIT subscriber use Twitter? Like print subscriber?
I would say that's a reasonably fair assumption.
I mean, I don't know about the typical. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the division is there. That's something you'd have to ask the New York Times. Like that's something their research department would probably know.
As someone in media, you're very likely to be following other journalists. I don't think many people pay as much attention to bylines and to journalistic personalities as we do.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, there's interesting bits and pieces. I think if they're presented in context, if it was like we're taking Maggie Haberman's tweets and putting it in her article that this tweet is referencing or associated with or relevant to, that would be one thing. But it really does sound like they're just kind of like picking and choosing sort of like interesting quips from their reporters online and then putting them on this page so that you can go, that's an interesting set of thing a reporter said once. And I'm not sure what value that adds necessarily.
The only thing that upsets me about this is that I know somewhere behind this is a social media manager that is forcing NYT writers to make quips on Twitter, and that is making me upset.
And like you said, ones that would stand alone without too much context.
Exactly,
So think about it this way. Would it make sense for us to put a feed of all of the Engadget editors' Twitter accounts on the homepage of Engadget? Like just constantly?
Yeah.
That used to be a thing. Like many
used to
moons
have
ago,
a rail
it wasn't
on
on
the
the front
right.
page, but if you went to like the about page, there was like one
A
of
rail
those
on the
buttons.
right with our tweets.
Oh, I know.
I think I would be fired if my tweets were pulled into the site.
I think that's why it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why it's not there.
I mean, connected to how this redesign of those first pages, the front section of the Times, they're also going to be adding highlights from the video and audio content that the team makes.
What?
Nice. I like it.
How?
QR codes.
Yep, QR codes. AR.
How?
AR. It's all like
Are they going to do a screen grab of a YouTube?
You have to flick the newspaper through the pages.
I'm waiting for somebody to just post videos of like old people trying to press the play button in the New York
the
Times.
screen grab of, yeah. That'd be pretty
It's
good.
going to be great. Let's just end that there. Let's just end it on QR codes, guys.
Yeah.